give me one shot here on a blue chip stock, believe me, Kevin, the only problem you're gonna have is that you didn't buy more.
Nobody knows if the stock is gonna go up, down, sideways, or in circles.
What's going on, NBA draft fans? Your boys are back, the Wolves of Wall Street, your favorite draft analyst. My name is Corey Zulliba, and I am here with my dude, Nathan Grubel, a.k.a. Draft Deeper, a.k.a. Youth Movement in 2024, to bring you a very fun episode of the NBA Draft Show. We are doing a Q&A 2025 NBA Draft style. Nathan, how you doing today? What's going on, my man?
We're living the dream, Corey. A little bit under the weather, a little disheveled, but we're here. We're happy. We're talking hoops, which is always a good thing, and definitely couldn't turn down the offer to come on the show and answer some listener questions.
You know, normally I would say, been a long time, but you and I actually got to scout a couple games in person not too long ago, so it was good to be back on the road, watching games live and direct with you, my man.
100%. I truly missed being in the arena. I was only at like one or two games last season because I kind of took a lot of the cycle off, as we know, but being back in a big time arena and looking forward to spending some more time in New York and across the tri-state area over the next few months. So definitely was great to be back in person, especially with you, my good man. It's always fun when we can talk to other scouts and talk about prospects between you and I, sort of catch up and get a feel for where we're at as far as our big boards and our rankings and where we're kind of looking ahead in the future.
And then, the shenanigans of the chicken tender incident, which, had us missing tip off because for some reason my chicken tenders just took 20 minutes.
How were the chicken tenders though? We didn't talk about how the chicken tenders were.
Yeah, this is the second podcast in a row I'm talking about them, so they're great. They were very good. They were very good. I'm actually going to be at Madison Square Garden on Saturday, which I'm very excited about for Gonzaga UConn. So I'm sure we will get into a few of the prospects. The way this worked, I asked the internet at large, that was Twitter, Blue Sky, our Discord channel, Reddit, the whole internet, to ask their 2025 NBA draft questions. So we got a bunch to answer. If you are watching live on YouTube, absolutely drop your comment, your question in the comments, and we will try to get to those as well. So I think we should maybe just get into it, right?
Absolutely. Let's. I'm excited to fly blind. I want somebody to completely throw me off my game with some wild questions here. So I'm excited to see not only what's already come through, but especially those who are watching live on YouTube, Twitter. Ask away, because I wanna definitely be caught off guard with some fun questions.
All right, awesome. So let's start with our Discord. If you don't know, if you subscribe to No Ceilings Plus, you get to hang out in the No Ceilings Discord, and we chop it up and talk ball there all the time. So if you'd like to do that, go to NoCeilingsNBA.com, subscribe to No Ceilings Plus, and we will get you the link to the Discord so you can come be a part of the community. And we got our guy Dave at Cannibal Serb in there, who asked, I've been thinking about Khan and McNeely, and do you think the lack of point guard production is making them both look worse than they are? What say you, Nathan?
Great question right off the bat. I certainly think it is a factor when you take a look at both players. Both are kind of first and foremost off the ball movement shooters. And so in order to actually take advantage of that type of skill set, you want to have good point guard play to actually be able to dictate, move the ball around. Now, thankfully for somebody like Khan, he's able to play alongside someone like Cooper Flagg. So even though they don't have a traditional point guard, Cooper's usage rate's been through the roof for any player in college basketball, let alone a freshman.
17-year-old freshman.
17-year-old freshman. So he's been really good at dissecting some defenses and getting the ball where it needs to be, playing in a little bit of pick and roll, inverted pick and roll. So that's been really fun to watch. The UConn situation is even more fascinating because Alex Karaban is kind of playing the same role for that UConn team. He had to miss a little bit of time already this season due to injury. So it's been a little rougher for McNeely in terms of also being a freshman. These guys are young. They don't have developed chemistry yet with their teammates. So you take a look at something that can work, but now all of a sudden you remove that off the table, and now you're kind of asking them to go back to the drawing board and readjust. So I do think from a chemistry standpoint, it is factoring into where they're at as far as prospects. But I'm also curious, Corey, to get your thoughts on where you're at with both of these guys in general, because I know you were high on both of them coming into this cycle. I've cooled off a little bit on both of them for different reasons, but where are you kind of at?
I am pretty much in the same spot that I was at the beginning of the cycle. I definitely think the lack of point guard production on both teams, and I mean especially on UConn, like it's started out pretty tough there. But I'm pretty much in the same spot. And it's not for Duke. It's not even just Khan. Like I think Malawak is another guy who is suffering because of that.
100%.
Like this is a guy who right now he is a play finisher. He's not a creator. And if you are a play finishing big, like what do you need? You need a guy who's going to be able to get you the ball in your spots. You could see the difference literally immediately with Derek Lively when he got paired with a guy like Luka who can get him easy shots. Now, Lively also is, a plus feel guy, right? And that was apparent. His advanced stats were good. It's not, he was a highly touted prospect. It's not a shock that he's good in the NBA, but like ultimately you need to be paired with the guys who can accentuate your strengths. And for Khan and for, a guy like Malak, I don't think Duke really has that. Like you said, to rely on Cooper to do that, like he's not a point guard. He's a plus playmaking wing, but he is not a guy who is going to dissect the defense in the way that, we've seen with some of the other freshmen in this class. If anything, at times it seems like Khan is, maybe their best playmaker as far as like being able to like calmly run a ball screen and keep guys on their hips and make, nice reads. And it's a bit unfortunate, that position wasn't necessarily filled, this year for this class, because especially when you are relying on such young players, like I think you really do need that steady presence. And I think we've learned Tyrese Proctor is just not a point guard. Like he's a combo guard. He can make, some good reads now and again, but right now he looks like he is best served as a guy who is splitting time on and off the ball. With McNeely, I've just seen him a bunch live already, like pre-college. Clearly, this UConn team is in a much different spot than they've been in the last 2 years. And, part of that, I think, is the big man play as well, adjusting to life without clinging as much as it is the point guard play. But for a guy like McNeely, like I've still seen everything that I saw. Like, he is never a break you down off the bounce with a bunch of dribbles, cook you guy. He was I'm going to attack a closeout. I'm comfortable putting the ball on the floor and attacking the hoop. He still looks like he's comfortable doing that. He's a guy who is still proving to me that he's a good shooter at, around 6'7". He's strong. I think he can defend, as good as, a freshman wing, with his profile possibly can. Like, I don't think he's going to be a negative on that side of the floor. I don't think that team is particularly talented offensively. So, I think he's a good ball mover, but he's not going to rack up like crazy assists. I think he makes the right plays. As long as he continues to shoot the ball at as well as he has, like I'm fine with it. But I definitely do think that as far as like their raw stats, I do think it's going to hurt. Like, Khan especially is struggling to shoot the ball from 3 right now. But he's also shooting 94% from the line. So like, when the stroke looks that good and you don't have a guy who's going to get you the ball in as comfortable spots as you might want them, then yeah, I think it's going to be a rough transition, especially as freshmen. But I think they're going to figure it out. It's a long season. So I'm looking to forward to, seeing how they do adjust. Let's take a YouTube comment. Shout out everybody watching live. Again, if you would like, make sure leave your comment below and we will try to get to it. Also, like and subscribe. We got a lot of good stuff coming up. All right, so we have AA Frequent Meeting, who says, I feel like this draft has 2 different types of possible primary initiators / heliocentric offensive players in Harper and Yaka Chones. On my board, both are tied. How do you differentiate from them?
It's a great question. So first of all, we got a lot of questions involving Yaka Chones, and I think for good reason, because he's been a revolution for this Illinois team. Really has done his part in propping that squad up and being one of those guards who he just kind of refuses to let his team lose. Like he's going to do every single thing that he can in terms of finding guys early within the offense, early within the game, making sure guys are comfortable getting the ball in their spots, but then also knowing when he has to flip the switch and take over. And I think that balance is definitely something in Yaka Chones' favor that we haven't quite seen that from Dylan at Rutgers, but at the same time, that Rutgers team, Corey, it's not great.
I like Jeremiah Williams. Like I do. I think Jeremiah Williams is a good player. But Illinois has, I think, a steadier, kind of secondary ball handler and probably even tertiary ball handler with, Will Riley. So I do think Yaka Chones is more capable of picking his spots and playing on and off the ball because the roster construction is built for that, right? Like Dylan, but at the same time, like Dylan's game is more heavily leaning on the ball. Like that's what makes him special is the fact that I think that Dylan can handle that usage. And like, not only is he scoring effectively, he's got like a 30%, 31% assist rate, and he's under 10% turnover rate. So he's not turning the ball over. Like he's making sharp decisions. He's kind of having an outlier year in that respect. I don't know what that says for his NBA projection as far as like his usage, scoring rate, and then his assist and turnover percent. Like I don't know how much that has right now with the sample size, but clearly like this is a guy who you could put the ball in his hands. You can trust him to make a good play, whether that's getting a bucket, whether it's creating a bucket. You could trust him to do that possession after possession after possession. I don't know if Yaka Chones is built like that, and I don't think that would be the best use of his skill set because he can also shoot the ball. Like it's easier to pair him off the ball. But that doesn't mean that like I don't really, really enjoy the Yaka Chones show. Like when he does have the ball, I made a post late last night watching the Illinois game. Like the way he operates ball screens is so fun. Like because he is one of these guys who like likes to live in the mid range a little bit. Like he's so good at utilizing the elbow, and it's really to me the cheat code of operating a ball screen. It's why Chris Paul has all of the mid range mastery, lockdown, and he's able to be 40 years old or whatever at 5'11", 6 foot, whatever he's really measured as, and still be pretty effective right throughout and have this prolonged career because he knows like you get to the elbow coming off a screen and you have the guy on his back. Now you're putting the big in a 2-on-1. He's a lights out mid-range shooter. Now the big has to play up, and that means that the roller can get to the rim and he's going to find the roll. And if the tag man isn't there, that means that he's going to be able to spray the ball to the corners or the wing, and he's just going to be able to dissect you. And he doesn't have to be speedy and bursty like he was when he was younger because he just knows how to get to that spot on the floor on either side and be effective from it. And just it basically means that you can dissect the defense. If the strong corner helps, well, that's an easy kick, right? Like it's simple. Yaka Chones has some of that, and I've seen that. So like it's hard to differentiate as far as like it might be preference for me. I've just seen Dylan in different settings up close be just like have the kind of mentality and mindset of like a superstar. I don't know if I've seen the same kind of superstar kind of play from Yaka Chones. Like Dylan believes he's the best player on the floor no matter who he's been on the floor with. If it's Cooper Flagg, he is going at Cooper Flagg because he's like, you guys think Cooper Flagg's the number one player on the floor? Like I'm the number one guy. I'm going to hit the game winning shot here. I'm going to tell everybody that I'm one. Like I'm going to hit, like, I see it with him in a way that it's like, you can picture him, in the graphics that the NBA social team is making. Yaka Chones, I think, is going to be able to fit into a bunch of different lineup constructions, but I don't know if you build your entire team around Yaka Chones. So I guess it's preference. Like, do you want the more heliocentric guy, or do you want the guy who maybe is a little bit more likely to slide into different, positions on the floor and play different roles?
I mean, I think Dylan, to an extent, can do a little bit of that too. He just, again, it hasn't been in Rutgers' best interest to even try to experiment with something like that because that offense is built around him, Ace. I mean, when Jeremiah's on, that's a third guy. But outside of that, I mean, you don't really have a lot of other options there. They haven't had a decent roster of bigs as far as that center position is concerned. Has it surprised you at all about how many paint touches Dylan Harper can just generate out of thin air, even without like a really good screening big man at the top? Like just how frequently he's able to get a step on guys? Because I think that was something I wasn't concerned about it, but that was something that scouts were concerned about on the internet before the season started was, is he that type of athlete to where he can consistently, utilize some burst, get downhill on, some pretty good on-ball defenders? And while I wouldn't say Dylan's faced a ton of awesome on-ball defenders yet this early in the college season, still without like a hard screener to catch somebody up top, he's still doing quite literally whatever he wants in terms of getting downhill, getting that paint touch and then doing whatever he needs to out of it. Does that surprise you at all?
No, not even a little bit. I was actually almost like flabbergasted when people were like trying to paint Dylan as it almost sounded like he was a minus athlete. Like that's what it seemed like a lot of people were talking about. And again, like maybe it's because I've got to watch him in game settings and practice settings, whatever, and see how big he is and how he moves. But like this is a dude who was like, it's not like he was a no dunk guy, a below the rim finisher. Like this is a guy who was like getting into the paint, throwing it down. He's long, he's strong, he can absorb contact, and his first step is lethal, and it always has been. And part of it maybe is because he's a lefty, and like lefties are, I don't know, guys just have I think a slightly harder time guarding lefties, but he stays low to the ground. He uses it, and that's like the difference between him and Ace, I think, because I think Ace's handle, I don't even think Ace necessarily has a quote unquote weak handle. I think it's that the fact that he plays upright so often makes it so that he can't kind of, get by guys because he's gaining leverage and using that to like kind of catapult him forward and play at different speeds. Dylan has that. He just plays at his own pace. And you look at a lot of the best players in the NBA and like how many of them do you go, oh, well, he's getting by on his, quote, like typical run and jump athleticism. Like not a ton of these guys. It's strength, skill, pace. And can you play at your own speed? Dylan just plays at his own speed. So like, because he was advanced enough to not go 100 miles an hour every time he touched the ball in high school, all of a sudden he's not athletic. It didn't surprise me at all. Like I think he's got plenty of burst, and the fact that he's so comfortable keeping the ball low to the ground, staying low to the ground, playing high, playing low, playing slow, playing fast. It's just like, this is a kid who is just very mature for his age. And so, yeah, I'm really not shocked.
I also think his athleticism is underrated to an extent in terms of just factoring in the conditioning that he needs to have to be able to take on the offensive load that he has been, right? Like a usage rate consistently between like 30 to, I think he had a game the other day, somebody said it was like 38% usage or something like that. Like to be able to take on that scoring load and playmaking load while also being efficient out of it, regardless of whatever 3-point results he's turning in, just what that takes for a freshman guard at the D1 level, who, again, I said that Rutgers, there have been some games where Rutgers hasn't played incredible competition, but they had some tough games on the slate over the last few weeks, and Dylan's still doing what he's doing. So I think from that standpoint, when we talk about athleticism, I think people want to go to like the run jump stuff that you were talking about, but conditioning is also a big part of it. It's a reason why I like someone like Dalton Connect last cycle, who was billed as a jump shooter, and that's primarily what he is, but it's also the ways in which he can score the ball because he's just flat out. He's just always moving. He's always hustling. He's always running, getting to his spots. And Dylan, in a completely different way, he's on the ball, but he's just always touching the paint. He's always getting in the basket. He's always able to create his own shot. He's creating something for something else. And he's never slowing down, right? Like you see him hustling in transition. You see him getting to other spots in the half court. Like the fact that he's able to do that right now at the level that he's doing it, that is an incredibly underrated part of his game in terms of his athletic profile.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. But I think Yaka Chones is awesome. He's clearly been on a heater lately. He's playing big minutes, coming up big time for that Illinois team. They're a lot of fun to watch, and he's, I think, been one of the bigger risers. I think he came in at 5 on the No Ceilings mock that we released on NoCeilingsNBA.com.
There was a heated debate in the war room about whether he should have went 3rd to the Utah Jazz. I was definitely one of the drivers of that bus in that war room because when you take a look at how a Utah Jazz team is constructed, right? Not to completely pivot this conversation on our mock draft, but
I think I know where you're headed. So let me weave in one of our listener questions, so you can kind of, because I'm sure this was also part of the conversation. 7 Iguanas from YouTube says, can you compare the style of play between Yaka, Chones and Yegor? And I'm sure Yegor's name had come up in the war room as well, if you're thinking about Yaka, Chones to Utah at 3.
It did, but I think the main conversation was actually between Yaka, Chones and Ace, although I can still talk about Yaka, Chones versus Yegor. I mean, with Demin, it's a bit different in terms of how he approaches the game. He's not nearly as physical as Yaka, Chones. He's much more perimeter oriented. The passing flair, the angles at which he's able to hit guys, the vision that he has because he is a taller initiator. I mean, you watch some of the passing and it's some special stuff, man. Like, I know you and I were talking about it with some of the other No Ceilings guys in our group chat after some of these BYU games, but what he can do at that size, it is special stuff. But I still like Yaka, Chones because of his willingness to get downhill, to absorb contact and go after guys. Like, he is a tough dude. Like, that was really my biggest takeaway across some of these scoring performances. It's not always about the makes and the misses, like the raw box score stats. It's how are you putting up the numbers? How are you getting the types of shots that you are? And how does this actually translate to the NBA level? Like, that dude is an MFer. And you kind of need to be, at this point, if you're going to play point guard in the NBA, you need to be physical. You need to be able to embrace contact. You need to kind of always have a primary plan, a secondary plan when you're going at some of these guys. And I believe that Yaka, Chones has that to an extent. I believe Yegor does too. I think Yegor's a very smart player. I think the lack of physicality has hurt him right now. I think it's made him very much so perimeter oriented. And I think when he has a streaky jumper, kind of like the results that he turned in international competition, that doesn't always help, what he's able to provide a team in terms of overall statistical output. But I do think the passing flashes, I think they're both on fairly comparable levels as passers, but I think right now Yaka, Chones has passed Yegor for me personally, just because of how willing he is downhill as a scorer.
I think that's fair. I think the shooting has kind of always been probably more consistent with Yaka, Chones. For me, I think Yegor is like one of the best passers I've seen in like years. Like, he does some stuff sometimes that I'm just like, holy hell. Like, and it's like, I don't know how he did. And he's 6'9". It's insane. I still have Yegor ahead of Yaka, Chones. I like the positional size. I think the shot looks way better. So even he definitely was like very inconsistent as a shooter, where sometimes overseas I'd be like, what is that hitch? And then other times I'm like, just do that more often. Like, that,
right.
Just shoot it like that. What are you doing? I think it's looked way better. And now he's on the radar. He's going to be playing, obviously tougher competition going forward. He's going to have to adjust, but still, like, his passing hasn't really been affected. Like, some of the reads that he's been able to make have been absurd. But Yaka, Chones again, and you know what? Like, anytime I can root for a Lithuanian-born dude, I will take that opportunity. I didn't take that opportunity last year. For the Lithuanian-born prospect. But as a Lithuanian myself, Yaka, Chones, seeing him ball out is awesome, because when we saw him at Hoop Summit, he was just like kind of willing to fit in. He wasn't really a guy who was trying to stand out that much. He and sometimes that's a good thing. Like, you just kind of, in those settings where it can be like that, like, not everybody can cook every possession, right? So the fact that he was able to kind of just be like, off-ball guy, let me go through the practices, do what I got to do, compete. Not a bad thing at all. But, he just didn't stand out in any way. I don't know if he's 6'6". I will say, like, I don't think he's short by any means. Like, I don't think he's VJ Edgecomb, who got listed at 6'5", and he's probably more like 6'3", or, maybe 6'4". Right. But I wouldn't be shocked if he measured like 6'4" bare feet or something. So it's not like a big difference, but 6'6" is like, it's solid size, but he's strong as a bull, man. And like, he's, like you said, he's an MFer. He really competes. Really great player. back to Reddit, we got Less Year 991. He said, "Is VJ Edgecomb a gadget player in quotes, a la Amen Thompson or GP2 Gary Payton II that can found positions but can be impactful in the right situation?"
VJ's been a fascinating evaluation, and there's a part of me that actually felt bad that he slid all the way down to 10 on our most recent mock draft to the Pacers, because I do think because of some of the offensive inconsistencies, his game's gotten a little bit of a bad rap. And I had questions too coming into the season. Like, I thought there was a pretty strong consensus top 5 of Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, and then it was VJ and Nolan Traore in some order, right? That was like the consensus top 5. And I always kind of came into the season with the opinion that out of those 5 guys, I think VJ and Nolan were probably the 2 that I figured were going to drop out the quickest out of that top 5. I think those other 3 have solidified their spots in some way, shape, or form. But with Nolan, I mean, we're going to get into Nolan, I'm sure, at some point. But with VJ, the scoring inconsistency, the fact that he doesn't have this go-to type of pull-up jump shot or this go-to type of scoring move, like, I get that it's hurt him, but he hasn't been as bad of a shooter as I thought he would be out of the gate. Not that he's been great, but I don't think he's been as bad as I thought he was going to be. And you factor in all the other stuff that he can do on the floor, kind of like that gadget term, right? The defense, the defensive playmaking, the ability to guard on the ball, guard positions effectively 1 through 3, his ability to cover a lot of ground, block shots on the perimeter like we saw the other night. Like, what he can do from that standpoint in transition, crashing the glass with his athletic profile, that's the type of guy you want somewhere in your rotation in the NBA. Now, he's not the same as Amen Thompson, because Amen Thompson is 6'7". He has much better passing vision and playmaking potential than someone like VJ does. VJ also hasn't been a negative from a playmaking standpoint, though. He does have a positive assist to turnover ratio. He's averaging 3 assists per game. Last time I looked on Sports Reference. So he hasn't been bad from that standpoint either. He's just not the type of guy who you're going to put the ball in his hands and tell him to go make something happen on offense all the time, right? Like, he's not the type of go-to scorer, but at the same time, if he's in your lineup and he's like your 4th or 5th option, and you have enough guys around him who can create shots for themselves or for someone else, you could take advantage of his cutting, of his ability to run out and transition. And then you were able to lean on everything he can do defensively. Like, that's still a very special prospect, and a big reason why I still think he belongs in that like top 5, top 6 somewhere conversation. I wouldn't say he's a shoo-in for the top 5, kind of like I thought, but I still think he deserves to be mentioned a little more than I think. He feels like, I don't know, Corey, feels like to me he's flying under the radar a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. It's interesting that you said you didn't think you think that he's shot it maybe better than you initially thought, because I think people felt pretty comfortable that he was going to shoot it. I was a little bit more murky that he was as good as his numbers indicated, like you, just because like he played at Lou High, like I'm out on Long Island, like I've been watching him for a few years up close. And I've just always come to the opinion that he is like much more of a open shot maker than like a shooter, even if he was like close to 40%. Right. And, one game that I watched in particular was against Montverde. And look, Montverde, obviously that team is, you see what all of the freshmen on that squad are doing, like, even down to Rob Wright, right? Like, who's not getting like draft buzz, who's hooping at Baylor.
Yeah, we need to talk about Rob Wright.
I'm willing to have that conversation.
This podcast or another one. We got to talk about that, man, but go ahead.
But VJ, he could not do anything. And Montverde put Coop on him. So, you got Cooper, who's, 6'8", 6'7", 6'8", 6'9", whatever he's going to come in at, huge, smothering him, all those guys helping him. Lou High has interesting guys, but not anything like Montverde had. And he just couldn't get off. And then, I saw him at Hoop Summit practices for a week. And, I just saw it. It was kind of like what made me go, I think I'm going to have him at like 7 or 8 in the preseason. Then the Bahamas stuff happened. I'm like, Jesus, like if this is the leap that he's going to take, even though I'm a little bit like weary of his shooting, he is like this demon of an athlete who's willing to just go up and like try to dunk on anybody in like the most obnoxious way where you're like, you might get hurt if you do that. And then he's doing the thing on defense. And I went, you know what? Like, I'm going to leave him at 5 because if he does figure it out, like his athleticism is wild, like completely insane. And it was like, it felt like a very young Westbrook to me. I've heard Oladipo too. And like, you know, Westbrook wasn't a freshman when he came out, you know, like, so I was like, there's something there. But like VJ, to your point, like defensively, oh my God. Like I did a BART query yesterday. Steal percentage of 5.1, block percentage of 7.1. So if we're going to call him a smaller guard than he's listed at 6'3", his block percentage of 7.1, like that is higher than I think Malawak at Duke.
I mean, it helps when you can jump out of the gym and, like I said, you can swat like a 3-point shot into the stands. Like when I saw that block the other day, it was reminiscent of like when I saw Zion do that at Duke. Where it's just like one of those that makes you just stand up out of your chair, like, oh my God.
He's a freak. He is the only right now, and it's 8 games. Like the numbers are going to drop. If they don't drop, that would be, you know, bizarre and insane, and like I don't even know. But Matisse Thybulle is the only other guy who had a steal and block percentage over 5. And he was a senior when he did that. Like VJ right now has a steal and block percentage over 5. He's a freshman. Again, it's only 8 games, but going back to, 2008, those are the only 2 guys currently, if you put that query in, which is crazy, right? Small sample. But yeah, I definitely see the Amen Thompson comparison a little bit. Like you said, I think Amen is a more natural passer, but VJ is nothing to sneeze at. I think he's some really good flashes as a decision maker. But, to VJ's credit, while I don't think he's going to be a lights out shooter, I definitely have more faith in him than Amen Thompson as a shooter. Right. So
right.
I get it both ways. I think that's why VJ does have a pretty solid floor, because he is going to be such a good defender, such a good open court athlete, a guy who's going to be able to, basket cut and play in space in the NBA. And then he's, a great defender. So he's got and then his ceiling is super high. So he is somebody that's going to confuse you though, because his situation, I think, is really going to be important, and where he lands and what the roster looks like around him. I think that's a lot of his success will ultimately hinge on that early in his career. He gets compared to Oladipo a lot. And I think when Oladipo went to the Magic and they were like, all right, you're a point guard now, figure it out. And like, ultimately that was beneficial, I think, to his development, but it wasn't pretty all the time.
What I'll say about the Oladipo thing, and this actually goes back to the most favorite column I've ever written for No Ceilings or anywhere, to be honest, was when I did that very large breakdown of Bilal Coulibaly's game before the NBA draft. And with Bilal, I made a comparison to, could he be a bigger, like a wingier version of a Victor Oladipo? And you might hear that off the bat, and you might think that sounds absolutely absurd. But when you actually go back and watched Oladipo early on in his career in Indiana, like people forget, first of all, he was a junior when he came out. He wasn't a freshman. But go watch freshman Victor Oladipo. He was not the Victor Oladipo that you're remembering on even the Magic, let alone like the Thunder and then the Pacers. Like, he wasn't that Victor Oladipo. And over the course of a few seasons, he better developed his handle. And then the most important thing was he was able to really score from the mid-range. It wasn't even 3-point shooting with Oladipo. It was the fact that, once he got that step on the defense, if he was going against someone who was backing up like in a drop coverage, like he was able to take that space and really make them pay in the mid-range. And for someone like VJ, the biggest thing with me offensively, even more than his shot, has been his ball handling, right? But it's not out of the realm of possibility to where he develops into a better ball handler and he becomes a little bit more comfortable rising up at the mid-range, because he is one of these athletes who can get by on a first step. He can take space. And if he figures out how to better navigate and what to do with it, he can be one of those guys that all of a sudden has one of those scoring type of developmental arcs to where you're looking at him as, a secondary type of bucket getter for your team. Now, is some of the passing and all that kind of stuff going to come along? That remains to be seen. But like I said at the top, he hasn't been a bad playmaker either. I think there's certainly a lot more on the table that he can develop and take advantage of, but you're already starting out with someone who has, like we talked about, an impressive physical profile, someone who works his tail off. I've already talked to a number of people coming into the season that have been, on the court with him in workouts before he got to Baylor, and like they all raved about his work ethic and how tough of a guy he is and how coachable of a player he is. So you're putting all this stuff together. And then it's funny, somebody said Amen Thompson, because if you hadn't read my piece on No Ceilings, my latest work, where I actually talked about what the Terror Twins are doing in Houston, like that type of defensive playmaking, even if they're captaining an offense that hasn't been the most efficient in the NBA, that type of defense, when you're able to create easy buckets in transition, when you're able to make plays like someone like a VJ can, it just helps your team out so much. And if VJ goes in the lottery like we're expecting him to, chances are he's not going to like a top 5 or a top 10 NBA offense. You're going to have to be able to create and manufacture some buckets in transition off of plays you're making defensively. And so he's able to do that right now. And then that's why I think you can't underrate a player like that, even if he some of the offensive results haven't been quite what we would have expected or hoped.
Absolutely. Let's get into Charlotte. Let's let LaMelo Ball get him some easy buckets.
Boy.
All right. On Reddit, we got Frequent Meetings 8975 says, what is Derek Queen's upside in your opinion? Do you see him as a potential offensive hub at the level of a Şengün? What potential lottery teams would he fit? I couldn't think of anyone other than the Pistons. So let's just start it out as, I don't know if we have had the conversation necessarily. What is Derek Queen's upside in your opinion?
I don't even know. I think that's a good thing though, right? Like I don't know. Like I think Derek Queen has the potential to be as good as he wants to be, right? Like he is 6'10", so he's not a traditional, 6'11", 7-foot center. He's slightly shorter, but he's got long arms. He's got a very strong body already. He's way more flexible and nimble than I thought he was even coming into this season, as you've talked about for No Ceilings already with some of the defensive stuff, and I know you'll get into that. But offensively, the way that he handles the ball, especially in the open court, how he can create for himself, he can create for others, getting downhill, both in transition and even coming out of certain actions for Maryland in the half court. Now he's creating open jump shots for himself. He's hitting fadeaways. He's stepping into some open threes. He was 2 of 5 from the 3-point line the other night. Like offensively, it looks like Derek Queen has the package you would want from any modern big man across the league. Now, I get defensively that there's going to be some matchups that are a little more difficult for him, right? If he has to guard someone who's 7 foot plus, who has a post game in the NBA, they're going to be able to back him down, maybe get him in a little bit of foul trouble. Like I get some of that, but most of the NBA isn't really doing that anymore. It's a lot of 5-out stuff. It's a lot about ground coverage. It's a lot of switching. It's a lot more defensive communication. And Derek Queen, that's all the stuff that Derek Queen is really good at on the defensive side of the ball. And so you're kind of just putting together what you would want out of a modern 5-man. And you get to a point where it's like, why are we not talking about Derek Queen as a potential top 5, top 6, whatever pick? I'll share a little inside baseball, Corey.
Okay.
Was great conversation when Philadelphia came up in the mock draft the other day. Because everyone's looking to me and they're like, Nate, you're the Sixers guy. What do you think should happen over here? And your boy Albert made an incredible case for Derek Queen at 5 to Philadelphia that almost got me to bought it. I know that for everyone that saw it published, we went with Yaka Chones, but I don't think it's unreasonable to talk about Derek Queen that high. I really don't. So therefore, I don't know what his ceiling is, but again, sometimes that's a really good thing if you do have a special prospect.
I mean, all transparency, I've been a very big Derek Queen fan.
Yes.
I had Derek Queen at 6 coming into the season. So like none of this is really shocking to me. And again, like, I watched him a lot in person in high school and at different events. And like, I was always like, oh, who's the best player on was the best player on Montverde today? Like Derek Queen. Who's one of the best players at the Jordan Brand Classic? Derek Queen. Like he just always found a way to make you go, yo, that guy can hoop. And, it was always like the question of like, what is his body going to develop into? I've been told he lost 20 pounds in the off season. And, I think he's certainly shown that he's moving like somebody who, has definitely gotten into better shape. And it's funny that Şengün is kind of the comp, and it's a pretty like you look at it and you go, yeah, that makes sense because Derek's got such good footwork down low and whatnot. But he's been like one of the best slashers in in the class too. Like he attacks from the perimeter without the threat of a real jump shot, right? Yeah, he knocked down a couple in the last game finally, but like even without the threat of the jump shot, he's still taking dudes off the bounce. And then once he gets down low, he's big enough to be patient down there and use his footwork to pivot and get guys to jump and pump fakes, his craft and all that. He's more athletic than you think, like vertically, like he's getting downhill and dunking, off one. Like you said, he can be as good as he wants, because if he continues to get in better shape and the chat's moving pretty fast here, but yeah, Tomas Carniero said Boogie was more athletic. What do you think of Naz Reid as a comp? Another guy who I think got in better shape, right? There's definitely some similarities there, because Naz is like, he's got the handle, he can get downhill. Shot came along. I was talking to Kyle Mann, and he mentioned Boris Diaw as a guy, as like a bigger Boris Diaw, and he was like, don't let the Spurs get him. And I thought Boris Diaw, which, yeah, you talk about like having a guy who can cover for him for any defensive concerns you might have, and I get like there are defensive concerns. Like I wrote about his performance against Marquette, and maybe I'm on an island, but I clipped up a whole bunch of clips. And if you want to read on No Ceilings Plus, you can subscribe and read my breakdown of his defensive performance in that game. He was moving his feet, boy. He was walling Cam Jones off, who is maybe the player of the year. Right now he's definitely in the conversation.
Up to this point, he is in college basketball. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, like he's in the if not, he's in the conversation, right?
Right.
He was walling him off. He was, forcing him to move off the ball and drop. He was switching. He was just doing what he could. Now, there were definitely rotations that he, doesn't have enough quick twitch to come up and pin the ball off the glass and slide over. There's stuff he's got to work on. He's got to continue getting in better shape. But like the way he flips his hips, the way he can move, the motor's not going to be consistent. But man, you had Wemby behind him to kind of mitigate some of that, right? Like that would be insane. But I thought Boris Diaw was kind of an interesting comp, just because, we're talking about all the scoring, but Derek's also like an insane playmaker. And I don't even think he's shown all the playmaking capabilities. He's definitely had some fun, passes this year, but hasn't shown his whole bag on that end either. So, when you talk about what he's going to be able to do in DHOs and even running inverted pick and rolls at the next level, and then making those passes out of the post when guys double down, like I think he's a real offensive weapon.
And when we talk about how the NBA is shifting to this 5-out style in terms of modern basketball, a lot of people go to, well, that 5-man has to be able to shoot lights out. And honestly, that's not the case. That's not necessarily what that means. Just what that means is that player handling the ball up at the top at that 5 spot, he's able to play in those DHO actions, right? So he's either able to hand the ball off to somebody and set an effective screen and then roll, take space, or he's able to basically reject that ball handler and take his man off the bounce himself and then go and create something, whether that's backing somebody down or, that's getting all the way to the basket, or that's, re-upping an action and setting some of the offense up himself. That's more so of what that means. And in order to be able to do that, you have to have a strong handle over the basketball. You need to be aware of your surroundings and what you're doing. And you need to be this player who can provide efficient offense in a low turnover based system. And that's a big thing about Derek too, is that when you watch him, I don't see him doing a lot of stupid shit out there. I don't see him really making a lot of mistakes out there. And like, I get that, to your point, yeah, there's absolutely things he needs to clean up and work on. So does every basketball player at 18, 19 years old. But you don't see him doing a lot of the lackadaisical stupid stuff out there. And I think that speaks volumes, especially when, that Maryland team has some good players. They're going to be a good team in the Big Ten, but they're not a great team, right? Like there's definitely some room to possibly have had a little more talent around him, but he's really captaining that roster, taking over. Like everybody on that team, even with some experienced guards on that roster, like they play like they know who the best player on that team is. And I think for any freshman to take that mantle on a Power 4 conference team right out of the gate, I mean, sometimes we forget about how special that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Dirty Dancer in the chat. Shout out to Dirty Dancer. Always at Queen is just boring but solid. You bite your tongue, Dirty Dancer. You bite your damn tongue.
You know what, man? Boring. You know what, man? Boring sometimes wins a lot of basketball games. If you think Derek Queen's boring, Dirty Dancer, then what are you doing with guys like Janai Broom and Kalkbrenner, and like what are you doing about some of those guys later on in this 2025 draft class? Because some of those guys are boring too. But guess what? They're going to hold on to roster spots most likely in the NBA for quite a while. So
he says Queen is
boring to win.
He does say Queen is late lotto though. All right. This was a really good question. I think it's one to think on. Adrian on Twitter, he is at @A_SH Sports. He says, if you guys looked at the top 10 to 15 players in the NBA right now and listed their characteristics and traits that distinguish them, what would those traits be? And if you had to project the traits of the top prospects within this draft, who would check the most boxes of that criteria?
So I've talked.
It's a great question.
It's a fantastic question. That when we talk about asking me questions that get me off my toes and like get me out of my comfort zone, that's a great one. So there's
everybody watching in the chat. I see some of you already doing it. Put your answers in the chat.
There's a lot of people who talk about shooting being a separator, just like the great Phil Beckner, who I was gracious enough to be able to interview for No Ceilings. You can find that on YouTube. I agree with that. But I do think the more and more you dig into what actually separates guys, it is the playmaking feel. It is the basketball IQ. It's being able to. It's not just in terms of understanding the playbook and knowing where you're supposed to be whenever a set play is called by the coach or by the point guard, whoever it is, maybe it's bringing the ball up. It's when that play breaks down and you need to go to option B, C, D. Do you even know what those options are on the floor at that moment? And are you able to actually execute and make that next play? I really do believe that I mean, there's plenty of indicators, right? There's positional size, which does determine higher level outcomes for basically every spot on the floor. But point guard, if you go through and look at guys, especially over the last 10 years, there is shooting, there's defensive ability, which is tied to athleticism. That's also tied to awareness. But I do think the more and more you dig into it, like everyone wants to, or there's a number of people who talk about how assist to turnover ratio isn't a perfect stat. It's a very imperfect stat. And while I can agree with you to an extent, there's only 5 teams in the NBA when I was looking at some stats about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago that were under a 1.5 assist to turnover ratio across the entire team. Not just at a position, not just in terms of their top talent. That's across the team. That's including the big men. That's including the forwards who aren't as higher usage. So you do have to be able to make decisions at a high level, not just, again, within the set plays that are called for you. But when everything breaks down, can we trust you to not only take the ball off the bounce, but get it to where it needs to go and make that next play? So I think if I'm going to pick out one thing for me, that would be that main characteristic that you got to have if you're going high in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that came to mind to me was definitely feel. But, it's tough because I think when you look at the best players, what makes them the best players is not that there is one specific thing that stands out, right? Like Giannis is not his best skill is not the same as Jokic,
right?
Whose best skill is not the same as SGA's, whose best skill is not the same as Jason Tatum, whose best skill is not the same as Luka Doncic, whose best skill is not the same as Anthony Davis, right? Like I think being able to be great in who you are and maximize whatever your greatest strength is definitely what makes the best players great. If I were to start, if someone was like, you need to start with one skill and in your creative player, definitely like high level feel is the thing that I would choose. But what I've noticed, and I think I continue to preach, I think physicality is
Yep.
really important.
Yep.
And like we go to a ton of college games, a ton of high school games, all this and that. I live in New York. Going to Knicks games is really expensive. And what am I going to go to a Nets game? Come on. So
watch Cam Thomas get all those buckets. No? Okay.
So if I'm going to sit close at an NBA game, it's expensive in New York. But I got to sit really close last year when the Clippers played the Knicks, and just seeing in person fully fleshed out star players like Kawhi, James Harden, Julius Randle, and seeing how physically gifted they are and how strong they were. And not in a run and jump fashion, but in a just like, when you go to the hole, are you going to get knocked to the ground?
Yep.
When somebody's going to the hole, are they going to be able to move you off your spot? Like, and being able to handle physicality, I think, is so important. And I think that rings especially true the deeper you get into the playoffs as the number one guy, when the games can get called, they let more go, and the physicality, they let those guys play, and it doesn't mean you have to be ripped, obviously. Like Jokic is not, and Luka are not the beacon of physical peak male performance, right? Like, but man, are those guys strong enough to absorb whatever
100%.
Contact and physicality goes their way. So it's just like, can you have that high level feel and mesh it with physicality? Like, even SGA is like strong, wiry strong. Like, he's stronger than you think he is. Tatum has gotten insane shape, right? Like, Anthony Edwards is a like physical freak. Jalen Brunson, being as small as he is only able to do what he does as consistently as he does because he can handle the physicality of the bumps and every bump that he takes. So like,
that dude was posting anyone up under the sun.
He's strong as hell, man.
Right.
He's strong as hell. So for me, I think strength is a really underrated aspect that all of the top players have.
I would agree 100%. And I think we were talking about, I think the question was more so geared, as you read it, correct me if I'm wrong, towards like basketball skills, like on-court skills, what are the things you value? But I think the intangibles are also arguably more important. And I do think just being willing to show up and put in the work every single day is something that does not get talked about nearly as much as it should on the internet, when we're all sharing our scouting insights and looking up BART queries and doing all that fun stuff. Trust me when I say that when you actually talk to like skills trainers and coaches and guys who work with these players every single day, it's good that we also have Corey on this pod because he is a high school coach himself, who works with players. Like, that to me is always the biggest thing that I hear. The biggest criticism is when a guy doesn't want to show up and put in that same work every single day, when he's not dedicated to his craft, when he's not doing every single little thing he can to be the best version of himself that he can be. That intangible, you need to have it if you're going to be one of the best pros in the NBA, bar none, right? And and those guys might not be the most physically gifted. They might not be the best shooters, but eventually they're going to become pretty damn good versions of themselves. And those top 1% guys, like the LeBron James, the Nikola Jokic's, the whatever superstars, Giannis, the superstars you want to throw out there, those guys are elite and they're winning championships because that's exactly what they're doing and that's who they're built to be. So if we are evaluating players to break through that ceiling and get to the tippy top of the NBA or whatever profession they're in, whatever professional sport they're in, that intangible characteristic is as important as any of the other skills, on-court skills that we can talk about.
100%. Now, to the second part, I guess, of that question, looking at this draft, which players at the top do you believe may fit that bill?
I mean, you say what you want about Cooper Flagg and how he might not be projected as a number one overall scorer on a championship team. Like, fine, okay, he's still doing every other thing that you would want a basketball player to be doing in a winning environment. He is selfless. He's team first. He gets after it every single trip down the floor defensively. He's more than willing to find guys on the move. He knows how to find ways to score baskets, even in non-traditional ways for a higher usage wing like him. Like, he is crashing the offensive glass. He's going up for the putback dunks. He's cutting. He's rolling. That type of player at his size with his athletic tools, you're going to have questions about his offense, fine, but that's a guy I'm taking, every single time at number one in this particular class. And to me, there are some other guys absolutely in that conversation. There's Yaka, Chones, who we've talked about. There's Dylan Harper, who we've talked about. I don't think a lot of people have come off the Ace Bailey train. I know some NBA scouts who have him at the top of their board still. But for me, if we're talking about who actually embodies all of what we just talked about, for me, it is Cooper Flagg. And the fact that we're saying that while he's 17 years old as a freshman in college is it's remarkable. It really does blow my mind sometimes.
100%. I think Dylan obviously is the first one that came to mind besides Cooper, for sure.
He's number 2 for me. Yep.
And I think you could make that the case that, talking about some of the things that we just talked about, you could put him at 1. And then I'll give you a sneaky one, a little bit lower, maybe down the board for a lot of people. I think Colin Murray-boyles might fit that a little bit.
You love some Colin Murray-boyles, man.
I do love some Colin Murray-boyles.
Yep.
I do love some Colin Murray-boyles. And when I look at him, you look at a guy, high feel, right? Like smart player, has some ball skills, and can definitely hold up physically, right? And I think he's going to continue to get in better and better shape, but he's strong. He's got the length. He's got the physical profile. Like he's going to be able to handle the physicality. The skills are there. He's smart enough to figure out a role with, I think, wherever he lands. Obviously, there's going to be good spots, better spots than others, right? Good situations, bad situations. But looking at that combination of kind of like high feel and physicality, like to me, he also kind of comes to mind, even if maybe right now, because he's not consistently knocking down threes every single game, he might not be the first guy that you think of, but he's got a lot of like offensive skills that you can appreciate even without the 3 ball right now. So he was another guy that came to mind that maybe isn't necessarily in the lotto for every player right now.
No, I agree. That's a good one. I mean, we talked about Derek Queen as well. Like he definitely fits that bill. It's when you start to put some of these things together, it's who are the players that I know situation is as important for everyone when you get drafted to an NBA team, but who are some of the guys who, regardless of team context, who do you have the strongest belief in they're going to succeed no matter what in their careers, health permitting? Like you start putting some of those things together. That's really ultimately where we land. Like, are they versatile enough to just find a home, find a role no matter what situation they're in? Guys like Cooper and Dylan and Derek Queen and Yaka. Like I believe that for those guys. And so that's why, some of those names are who we're seeing trend up the board.
100%. I think, let's take one more quick one. Van Hoot 2234 on YouTube says, do people overthink Ace Bailey when talking about and thinking about certain metrics like paint touches?
Ace is a tough one, man. I think it is. I'm not in the extreme camp of Ace shouldn't be a top 5 pick. I'm not in that camp. What I will say is that for me, Ace is closer to 5 than he is to 1. And the reason why I say that is, to me, Ace is someone who, if he's going to be the best version of himself, it's going to be someone who's having more shots and opportunities created for him rather than the inverse. And I think with guys like that, they can be incredibly valuable players, right? Because elite shooters, elite scorers like that, they don't just come out of nowhere like everyone seems to think that they do, right? Like those Ace is a special shooter and a special scorer for a reason, but I do have some more worries about the ball handling. I do have some worries about, when he's on an island, sometimes he doesn't quite know what to do with the basketball. His default, because he can, is he's just going to try to rise up and score over anyone. And to an extent, that can work for you, but that can also lead to some pretty inefficient nights. It's why we've kind of seen from Ace Bailey for every 2 great games that he's going to have at Rutgers, he's probably going to have 3 stinkers at some point around it. It's going to be like a 2 out of 5 situation. Now, to me, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to knock him down your board. It just means that if he is more dependent on others to help him succeed, is that the type of guy you should be taking at number 1 overall? Now, the fun counter argument to that would be, Well, Nate, you just said you had Cooper Flagg number 1, and Cooper Flagg isn't always doing everything for himself to score either. That's right. But I also believe in Cooper's ball handling and decision making more than I do right now with Ace Bailey. And so, look, Ace is an awesome shooter. He is still a top 5 guy to me. He's probably the closest thing we've seen to Michael Porter Jr. as a prospect coming out of high school, which is crazy because MPJ was, if people remember MPJ pre-back injuries, like, that dude was an absolute freak. Like, he was a worthy number 1 overall pick. He is a special talent, but yeah, that's kind of where I sit with Ace. It's not as clean cut to me as I thought it would be. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, the only guy who's jumped Ace on my board is Yegor. I think I was really high on Ace coming into the year. I'm still really high on him. I think guys who are as tall as he is, who can make the kind of shots that he can make, have a pretty high floor. And I think that he's a good defender, or at least like shows good defensive flashes when projecting what he could be going forward. And he's a guy who is still really young, going to be 18 on draft night. And I think he's very moldable. Do I think he's going to be a superstar? I don't, but I didn't think he was going to be a superstar coming into the year. And I think when I was at Hoop Summit and I saw him and AJ DeBonsa on the same court together, who are both tall scoring wings, and you could see the stark difference. And I think, with them both playing on the same floor, you go, all right, well, there's a different level that a guy like AJ DeBonsa has because of his ability to score the ball and get to the rim and do everything that he can do, with the ball in his hands that Ace just doesn't have in his game right now. But I think he's going to get better as a ball handler. I think he's going to get, better and as a decision maker eventually, because he's going to be afforded the opportunity to do that.
Sure.
He is not going to be a guy that, right now the decision making doesn't look great. And if he was 6'3", you'd worry about it because you'd be like, well, he's only going to have so many chances on the floor. He's going to be a guy who's at baseline, a 6'10" movement shooter running around the floor, like who can get out in transition. And it's not as if he's not a good finisher when he is around the rim. Like the Brandon Miller comp, Brandon Miller struggled to finish at the rim. Ace struggles to get to the rim. There's a difference.
Yeah.
Now Brandon had a better handle. They're not 1-to-1 comps. But I really like his baseline. I like his athleticism. I don't think he's in a particularly good developmental spot at Rutgers.
No, absolutely not. At least he's playing alongside someone though, like Dylan.
Yeah.
To where you're not looking at Ace to do every single thing for the offense. Because if that was the case, if he was the guy with no real, someone to look over at him and they're similar types of talent, like that to me would be an even bigger problem in terms of his developmental context, because then we're opening up a whole other can of worms, and that's not a spot where I'd want him. So at least he has someone like Dylan playing alongside of him. Yeah,
no, 100%. Do I think it's the worst developmental context? No. But do I think it's great? No. So, I think hopefully he gets into a better one at the next level. And most of the top teams have, guys already who are going to be their creators and are going to be this, or are going to be right. So I think there's going to be a number of spots that he's going to be in the same kind of context where he's not relied to be the number one shot creator. And as long as we're talking about him in that context and we can look at him as what he is, then I think there's something to work with. And NBA teams are going to take that shot. It doesn't matter what his BPM is right now, 8 games into the season. So, it does, look, should we look at that in the long term when the season's and maybe try to evaluate, who he is versus what he could be? Of course, right? Of course we should. But for a guy like him who's 6'10", who can make the kind of shots, again, he's going to get more opportunities than the other guys who are maybe going to put in some of the numbers, those kind of numbers, right? He just is. Zach LaVine was an athletic freak. He got more of an opportunity. A guy like Jaden McDaniels is going to get more of an opportunity. Shoot, Zaire Williams is getting more of an opportunity. Yep. Ace is going to have the same kind of opportunities. And to me, he's ultimately a higher end talent than, the majority of those guys.
You'd see Zaire more often if you wanted to go to some of those Brooklyn Nets games, but
yeah.
What I'll say about Ace, and D Steven in the chat did say that I think Ace is safe, and I see where D Steven's going with that. I will never call a prospect safe anymore because just life happens and too many things happen, and that's just the nature of the business that we're in, right? If we can't necessarily predict the future, but we can go along with what we see is working in the NBA. And I think when you're projecting out someone like an Ace Bailey, part of the whole point of drafting high and getting a lottery pick is securing a player on a contract where you're going to be able to extend them past their rookie deal. You're going to be able to get them on a second deal and hopefully a third deal, in the sense of you actually see a long-term runway for this player with your team, not just a long runway in the NBA. Like, obviously that's an important part of it too, but when you look around at someone like an Ace Bailey, when are you not going to need a 6'10" movement shooter, someone who can get a shot off on virtually any defender you want to have hard closeout on him? Like, when are you never not going to need that player, right? So that's, to me, like, I get a lot of the concerns people are talking about, and even though I may share a few of those concerns for people who have knocked Ace down their boards, you can't get too low on that player though, because a type of guy like him is going to be valuable in nearly any lineup construction, nearly any team construct you want to throw out in the NBA. Like, he's going to get a second, third, however many contracts, health willing, because that's how valuable having a shooter like Ace Bailey is on the basketball court. Yeah,
100%. And at the top of the draft, you have to take swings sometimes, and the swings don't always work to the best of your ability on a spreadsheet.
Right.
Like, sometimes you have to take risks and make sure that those risks are calculated, and Ace might be a calculated risk, right? Especially like you said,
yeah.
There are scouts that have him at the top of their board that work in the league.
Yep.
And I'd imagine that's going to remain for the majority of the year. They've gone to practices, they've gone to the events, there's just other information they're taking into account outside of the games, which they're also going to be at. So I think that's a good spot to end with contentious debate amongst, I'm sure, the leadership, the viewership, listenership, and watchers right now. So comment below, make sure you let us know how you feel about Ace Bailey, where you think he should land, and what you think his ultimate upside is. Nathan, tell the people where they could find you, what you got cooking up, and thanks for hopping on today.
Absolutely. You can always find me on Twitter at Draft Deeper. That's the best spot to find me. You can also find me Draft Deeper on Blue Sky as well, for anyone who's over on Blue Sky. So both places. What I have cooking up next, I'm going to be writing about the G League, and I have a really fun piece I'm cooking up for No Ceilings. I'll give you a hint. If you're not a No Ceilings Plus subscriber, you're going to want to be for this one, because I'm doing much more of a deep dive compared to a more service level piece. I have a lot of things planned for the G League still, but this is going to be one of those bigger pieces. I think it's going to really add some context into how you evaluate players for the NBA, not just out of college and in high school for a lot of what we talk about with the draft, but when it comes to pro personnel scouting, what are these teams actually looking for? What should they be looking for? What types of players can succeed coming out of the G League? So I think it's very valuable information. And if you want to get better at evaluating the game of basketball as a whole, not just focusing on the draft, definitely something you're going to want to read. So make sure you become a No Ceilings Plus subscriber. You can check out that and all of our other wonderful premium content. And yeah, that's what's coming down the pipeline next. So coming to a Substack near you.
I'm very excited for that, because that was something that, you had kind of talked about early on, in the summer, that you wanted to cover. And this is something you've been passionate about covering for a while. And it's, a hole, I think, an empty space in the scouting arena. And I think, the fact that you're going to cover the G League, and people are going to see a bunch of names that they recognize and are very familiar with. And that, I think, just goes to show how competitive it is right now to earn a roster spot within the league. And I think even with expansion, I think it's still going to be really competitive and hard.
I'm so glad you said that. Yep. I'm so glad you said that. I'm in the same boat. I've posited to multiple people that we talk about getting 2 more expansion teams, and I'm looking around like, I'm not sure that's going to fix the problem that we have. Like, everyone's like, we need to get expansion spots so that someone like Lonnie Walker doesn't have to go overseas, which There were few guys who were as big of Lonnie Walker fans before his draft as I am, but at some point, if you're a player who's getting passed over by the league because they just don't think you're a valuable player when it comes to actually winning basketball games, I'm not sure that's going to change. Like you may get another chance because of the expansion initially, but when those teams actually figure out what they want to build, what direction they want to go in, and they become more competitive, a few years after their expansion, guess what? They're going to be operating the same as all these other NBA teams who are trying to win games and get higher spots in the playoffs. So I don't think that's necessarily going to solve the problem. I think it's only going to further echo exactly what Corey and I are talking about, which is that the league is deep, it's talented, and even when you're evaluating some of these college and high school guys, go watch a few G League games when you get a chance, and you see some of the names that are putting up points and getting big buckets down there, and it's like that. That's the long line that's waiting to get a shot in the NBA. So if you think your favorite prospect and you're trying to ask the question, can they take so-and-so's job in the NBA? Can they take so-and-so's job in the G League? I think is as important of a question to ask sometimes.
100%. So I'm excited to read that. Make sure that you like, subscribe, share the No Ceilings YouTube podcast, all of the socials. We're on Blue Sky. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. We're on TikTok. All that stuff. You can follow me at Corey Tulaba on most of those things, if not at NBA Draft Dude. Appreciate everybody watching live, everybody listening on the podcast feed, everybody rocking with us. As always, draft season is heating up. We're getting closer and closer and closer to the most competitive games of the year. If you're at MSG in the next couple of weeks, I will be there. Come say hi if you see me. Until next time, we are out. Peace.